Hi, friends and family. This is Doug, and I decided to start a channel called basically Common Sense 2023, but Common Sense. And that was the title of a book by Thomas Paine in the lead up to the Revolutionary War. I pray that's not what we need to do, but literally, he was saying what he was advocating wasn't radical or any extreme position. It was simply common sense, and yet he was getting resistance and pushback. So he wrote a book called Common Sense. And so here's an issue of common sense. Let's ask the question: do we need to bring back the League of Women Voters to moderate debates? And I call it debates because if you remember what it was, is they would just have questions asked, and they would ask one question to a candidate, but then sometimes originally they used to ask the same question to the other candidate so we could compare. But then they kind of moved off of that, and they had one question to the candidate on a topic, but then the next candidate would get a different question. So they didn't always make it in the format of a debate. But regardless, at least we had some objective third party who did care about democracy. They were people who had led the fight to get women the right to vote. Such a basic civil right of an American citizen. It took so many years, but they succeeded. So they had a position of credibility, and that's why Americans trusted them, and that's why we put this trust in them for many decades. But from the 20s all the way to the 80s, and so what happened? Why did we lose them? Well, why am I bringing this up? And we're going to get into what happened with the women voters being knocked out. In April 2023, the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, has decided not to require Biden to debate Democratic Party challengers. And there's Robert F. Kennedy, and there's another woman, Miss Williamson. And but as even on the Washington Post, I think it's the Washington Post, it says democracy dies in darkness. I think that's on its masthead. Wherever it comes from, it's just basically obvious, is we are being told that darkness is the path of democracy. And yet we're fighting all these wars in foreign countries and advocating democracy for other countries, but we don't seem to have it here. Because if you can't debate you're within a political party, when there's only two and they're limited, then the people are forced to have a choice of Mr. Biden, somebody who's obviously not medically capable of handling the job anymore, and yet we're supposed to hire him to do the job. I wouldn't hire him to do anything in my life, would you? And yet you want him to run your country. And so the obvious problem is whoever the Republicans put against him could win easily because he's such a bad candidate, and yet he won already. So that's voting in his favor. I don't think it doesn't justify the situation. We have a very good alternative in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He needs to be given more time and attention and focused on. And I think we have forgotten that debate is where you learn things. And when you think about the Civil War, the Democrats were the party of slavery, and the Republicans had a new candidate, a guy who just came on the scene out of nowhere, just like Robert F. Kennedy, and said, hey, you know what? Maybe we should get rid of slavery. Maybe we should stop this expansion of slavery. Maybe we should consider that there's human rights against slavery. This was Abraham Lincoln, and he was the founder of the Republican Party. Okay, so that's how that started, and you have to give people some airtime. And the debate Stephen Douglas allowed him to have gave him a forum, without which we would have probably still have slavery in this country. So debate is good for us. It's healthy. It makes us think. It makes us think of what alternatives there are to what we believe, and it's the status quo. And this is what we're really in a trouble right now, and that's what I want to talk to you about. So I want to suggest that we ask Tucker Carlson and the Legal Women Voters to work together to come up with a platform that Tucker's really popular command of both political parties, both Democrats and Republicans, trust Tucker Carlson. And you'd say, whoa, what do you mean, Democrats? Yes. Actually, Fox News grabs more Democrats when he was on Fox News and he had his show. 42% of Democrats aged 25 to 54 had the market share. CNN had only 33%, MSNBC got 25%. So Carlson was top among Democrats in the demo across all of cable news that month and ranked third place among Dems in total viewership. And if you look at Tucker Carlson, he'll put on Jimmy Dore, who's a far left person, but a person who has common sense. And so he can see through what was going on with Russiagate. He knew it was all made up stuff to distract us, and he was trying to get us to focus on social issues that he thought was of concern. And we wasted 3.5 years of time when we could have made some progress on social issues. He was right. Jimmy Dore was vindicated. So, but even though he's a left person, he was still able to use common sense, and that makes Jimmy Dore have credibility. Same thing with Tucker Carlson. Even though he's on the right, he has common sense. He can get to the issues that are common sense issues in the middle, where people need to be protected from issues, and the government needs to serve its proper roles that both parties can agree upon. But instead, we've created a uni-party state, and that's really what's happening in our country right now. And so I'm thinking Tucker Carlson would be a good moderator, or at least he's going to have a Twitter show apparently coming up soon. And or even if he doesn't have that, he could get Elon Musk to allow him to put on a demonstration where the League of Women Voters provides the question format and does all of that, and Tucker asks the question, helps them to gain an audience because they have been out of the loop. Well, how did they end up out of the loop? And by the way, I want to say maybe we also should have Glenn Greenwald, who is another person on the left who Democrats would trust, and he could be a help in a democratic setting. Okay, now maybe you might don't like him, maybe because he's politically, pro free speech, pro Assange. Is that why we don't like him? That's why the Democratic Party doesn't like him, or is it because he criticizes the partisanship of the Democratic Party and the elites, and they don't serve the people? Maybe that's why. Now, here's what Wikipedia reports happened with the League of Women Voters. And when I read this to you, I think you're going to be shocked. So I took the most important section. It says the League of Women Voters sponsored the United States presidential debates in 1976, 1980, and 1984. On October 2, 1988, the League of Women Voters, 14 trustees, voted unanimously to pull out of the debates. And on October 3rd, they issued a press release condemning the demands of the major candidates' campaigns. League of Women Voters President Nancy Newman said that the debate format would, quote, perpetrate a fraud on the American voter, end of quote, and that the organization, meaning the League of Women Voters, did not intend to, quote, become an accessory to the hoodwinking of the American public. And there's some footnotes. End of quote. All presidential debates since 1988 have been sponsored by what? The Commission on Presidential Debates. Sounds official, like it's run by the government. No, it's not. It's a bipartisan organization run by the two major parties, which means it's a uniparty that both equally engages in the same fraud that the League of Women Voters said would happen when you use their formats. So these two political parties have agreed on, hey, let's use a format that misleads the American people and doesn't get to the heart of the issues, because we don't want to do that. Okay. So we need this now more than ever. We are facing existential threats. We are now engaged in a war with Russia that we were told would never happen. We are now supplying F-16s when we were told that would never happen, that would lead to a full-scale nuclear war. Now we're sending them. Do you realize that just happened this week? It's now May 21. This is what was last said 3 days ago, that we're sending them. This is what the craziness, and so we don't have any democratic input anymore. Well, Robert Kennedy Jr. is coming on board here to tell us something that in the center of the country, meaning the center view of both on social issues and on political issues and on matters of life and death and war, he seems to hit the pulse of the American people, and he has risen up to be equal, virtually equal in election. How many people would vote for him versus Biden? If an election was held right now, it would be a dead heat between him and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If they had, these are the only two choices you had. So let me just, I want to show you an interview that Tucker Carlson had with him, which would show you objectively what this man is about. and that Tucker Carlson would let him speak if he was the moderator asking questions. And that's what we need. We need someone who will let this man speak, because when he speaks, he makes sense. But when you watch Crystal Ball or you watch other people, they have to find a way to shut him up and interrupt him and not let him speak. And we, the American people, need to hear him speak. I'm sure if Lincoln got up on TV now and he had to try to say that slavery was wrong and it was still going on in our country, they would do the same thing that now these in the moderators who are in with the in crowd, the establishment would say, well, we don't really need to hear about slavery. It's, it's a well settled problem. It's, there's no dispute. You're a fringe person. You are a crazy person. That's what they would talk about if we were still had slavery today. Do you understand? Because it's like such an economic fact that how can you dispute slavery is productive? And the slaves, don't mind it, and whatever they made up in the old days, it's going to it would be establishment. And that's what we got to realize. We are literally in the same type of thing, but it's now life and death for the country itself. So I want to just play a clip from Tucker Carlson to make my point. Oh, and did I mention this? I want to go back and make this point that his demographics, I'll just say it. His demographics are, he is the most influential person in the Democratic demographics, because he, as a single individual, pulls in almost the same amount as all the other what you might call liberal Democratic networks, CNN, MSNBC. So let's listen to what he did in a recent interview in April 2023.
And we are honored to have him on our show tonight. He joins us now. Bobby, thanks so much for coming on. So you are, of course, being dismissed as a vaccine nut, but watching your announcement today, it wasn't about pharma even so much as it was about America's place in the world and what do we do about it. If you wouldn't mind summarizing for our viewers where you think we are and what you think we ought to do.
Well, I gave a long speech, Tucker, and thank you again for having me on.
Of course.
And for that very kind of an introduction. I think that the general theme of my speech was this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which is turning our country into a corporate kleptocracy, into a system of socialism for the rich, and this kind of a cushy socialism for the rich, and this kind of brutal, merciless capitalism for the poor. It keeps us in a state of war. It bails out banks at the same time that last month, the United States government told 30 million people it was cutting their their food stamp checks by 90%. It took 15 million people off of Medicare. The same month, it gave $300 million to the Silicon Valley Bank, and tapped up the cost of the Ukraine war to $113 billion. We're sending $113 billion to the Ukraine. The entire budget of EPA is $12 billion. The budget of CDC is $11 billion. We have 57% of American citizens could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. A quarter of our citizens are hungry. So we're cutting welfare and food stamps by 90%. And we're bailing out the bankers. We're paying for a war that, we can't afford. And with the way that we do this is by printing money. We've printed 10 centuries of money in the last 14 years. And that caused the inflation, which raises food, which is a tax on the poor. Oh, we've raised food prices for basic foods like chicken, dairy, and milk by 76% in the last 2 years. And now we're cutting people's food stamps and bailing out banks the same month. It doesn't make any sense. And we need to get rid of this kind of corporate control of our government. It comes from our democracy is devolving into kind of a corporate plutocracy.
I would think that what you just said, and I'll just be honest, I agree with most of it. But even if I didn't, I would think, boy, that's a really interesting thing to say. You have a coherent worldview. You've written a lot of books on these topics. You've clearly thought about it. You're not in it for the money. So don't these issues deserve a wide hearing before the public entering a presidential year? It seems to me that they do.
I would think they would, and particularly the issues of war. And, my son went over and fought in the Ukraine. As I said today, I think people, the major doyens, sort of diplomatic, the most respected diplomatic gurus like Henry Kissinger and Jack Matlock and Larry Wilkinson have all said the Ukraine war is a huge problem for our country because from a geopolitical standpoint, it's driving the Russians close to the Chinese, which is the worst thing for us. But we're there for the right reasons because we have tremendous compassion for the Ukrainian people and the illegal invasion, the brutality, and also their valor and their courage. My own son was serving over there. He joined a special forces unit as a machine gunner. He fought in the Kharkiv offensive. Americans care about the underdog. They care about that kind of suffering. But the question is, why are we in the Ukraine? Because Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, said that we're there to exhaust the Russians. President Biden has said that we're there to deplatform, to depose Vladimir Putin. And if that's why we're there, and we're killing a lot of Ukrainians as pawns in a proxy war between two great powers. Here's one last thing I would say. Nobody talks about this. There's 14,000 Ukrainian civilians who have died, but 300,000 troops. The Russians are killing Ukrainians at a 7-to-1 to 8-to-1 ratio. They cannot sustain this. What we're being told about this war is just not true.
No, it's not true. And I would hope, despite the fact you criticize their advertisers, other media outlets would have enough respect for our country and for its voters to give what you said a hearing, because I think it's really important. And we're, again, grateful that you came on our show tonight. You're always welcome. Bobby Kennedy Jr., thank you.
Thank you very much, Tucker.
Okay, next I want to talk about the April 2023 DNC decision not to require Biden to debate the Democratic Party challengers. Let's see, what was the reaction to that?
According to a Washington Post report, the DNC has decided it will not hold any primary debates. This despite two official challengers, of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson, who poll at roughly 14% and 5% respectively. According to recent data, leftists like former Ohio State Senator Nina Turner are calling the decision undemocratic. I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah, this is, what is he afraid of? Look,
I'll tell you what Biden is going to be afraid of, or is afraid of. He's going to lose head on against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in any kind of debate. And the party ticket would go to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who could beat any Republican. So Biden is not trying to think of the better of what would be best for his own party. He wants what's best for himself, and that doesn't serve well for us because it means we have to go into darkness, meaning we have no debates, and that's not the way to win an election. If you were a Democrat, and I'm not taking sides here. I'm just simply saying if you were a Democrat, you want to win. You're not going to win with Biden against even Trump in this situation, and Trump is taking positions diametrically opposite of Biden on things that are matter of life and death, and trying to turn this economy around. And he can do it because he's already done it. He can prove that. He's got a track record where that at least nobody can dispute he did right. He did get our economy going. So what are you going to do? You're going to just have this guy who can claim he did a better job in the pandemic and getting people vaccinated and all of that, which is now a dubious thing now that we've learned some more science. That a lot of things we assumed was true weren't true. Anyway, but that's a whole nother topic. Anyway, so let me just show you what the Hill also covered on what is the vote in if there were a general election held today between Robert F. Kennedy and Joe Biden, who would win in that? And that's very important. That tells you who's more popular.
A bombshell new poll from Rasmussen shows Robert F. Kennedy Jr. neck and neck with President Biden in a survey of the general electorate. Amongst likely Democratic primary voters, Biden still leads Kennedy 62-19.
So what is the common sense solution to this problem? Whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, everybody knows you have a debate. You have a debate to see who's the better candidate. That's the way it's always been done. That's the way it should be done. Biden has no right to have done what he did during the 2020 election, which is try to run his campaign from his garage or his studio. But he got away with it because it was COVID. But no more is that an excuse. He's got to come out of the closet of his house and do what he's got to do. He's got to debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Let's hear what Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s ideas really represent. Okay. And that would be obviously in the best interest of the American people, so we can make a careful vote. And so we need to have that debate between the two or three main challengers to Biden to be done in the Democratic Party. And then when we get past that point, we need to have, again, a fair debate that is handled not by CNN and MSNBC. We need debates by people who are in the center of the country, meaning people like Tucker Carlson, whether you believe it or not, he's more centered than anybody else. At least he's open about what he's Republican, and yet he has a commonality with people like Jimmy Dore, Glenn Greenwald for against censorship, against in favor of free speech, against these endless wars, and what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Himself said is capitalism for the poor, brutal capitalism for the poor, and socialism for the rich. And absolutely, he did a great job pointing that out. It's just the irony of ironies of our country. We have it so backwards. And but anyway, so I suggest what we should fight for is to get back the League of Women Voters to manage the dialogue first within the Democratic Party, have that speech, and you know what, the Republicans should do the same thing. Let's invite the League of Women Voters back in, and then the League of Women Voters does it again in the final lead up to the presidential campaign. Whoever wins the nomination from each of the two parties, that person, those persons would then have another League of Women Voters debate. And this is the way it's always been done. That's how democracy works. Democracy dies in darkness. And I suggest we get as moderators Tucker Carlson, maybe Joe Rogan, and do a Twitter version of this. People know how to open their computers and do it that way, and then probably air the Twitter feed directly into Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and they will all handle it simultaneously. They can make their own commentaries, whatever they want to do, and maybe do what, as I recollect, the League of Women Voters used to have these select questions that were pre-prepared, but they wouldn't share it with the opponents. That would be unfair that somebody that did that cheated in the 2016 election, but I won't go into that. So you have questions done in advance and then prepared by the League of Women Voters, and then they ask those questions. And they should ask the same question to each of the two candidates. And instead of getting them fighting one against each other, literally just ask the one to talk about their question and then answer it. And then the second person says, this is how I answer it. And then rotate it where the next question goes first to the other candidate, the second candidate who was asked the question initially second, and now he goes first, and then you rotate it back and forth, and that's the best way of doing it. And what else? And then I think maybe for purposes of the fans who want to hear Joe Rogan's questions and maybe Tucker fans questions, maybe what the League of Women Voters do is they solicit questions from Tucker fans and from Joe Rogan fans, for example, and those questions are vetted by them, and they decide which ones are the better ones. But at least it's a real person, and then they have to make sure that person has no interest in some corporate interests or incentives. These are simply regular citizens asking good questions, and then maybe videotape them and then have that pre-recorded, and those questions are relayed. And so the American people can see it was a real person. They have no bias in the sense that they're not part of a corporate machine that's trying to influence the electorate. And then do things like that we can strip out of our politics anything about corporate or political bias, and just we need real questions with real facts and answers to these questions. That's what I liked about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s statements to Tucker Carlson. He was dealing with facts, things you could not dispute, that had been going on in our country that was unfair, the cutting back of food stamps at a crucial time when people are now dealing with inflation that's gone up 75% on the core food of milk, dairy, and eggs. I mean, she was absolutely hitting on the nail on the head. What about that? So this is what the media doesn't do its job anymore. It's in the pocket of the parties. And that's not in the best interest of the American people. The parties, once they control the media and they have outlets, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that there's one station for the Republicans and 5 stations for the Democrats. They should all be independently critical of both parties and help move the country forward. But that's not what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. We are being deserved by the very structure of our media, and illegal women voters is the best way to break through that and get independent voices like Jimmy Dore, like Tucker Carlson, like Joe Rogan, to get their voices out there, because that's where American people want to hear. Or Megyn Kelly, she also seems to have some independent positions. And Candace Owens, you maybe don't like her. Well, it doesn't matter. She's thoughtful. She looks at evidence. So whether you like her or not, it's not about whether you like or agree with her opinions. Does she ask good questions? Does she look at facts? That's what I think. We need more voices like this. Instead of suppressing them, we need to actually encourage them. And if they're wrong, let's expose the wrong. Don't suppress them without listening to them. And that's what's going wrong in our country. And that's why we're going down a dark path. And democracy dies in darkness. A very true saying, right on the Washington Post masthead. Okay, hope that helps everybody. We need to get this straightened out quickly, because we need the legal women voters to be revigorated into our election cycles. Take care, everybody. Ciao, bye.